Welcome, everyone, to the October chapter meeting of the Washington County Master Gardeners. Our presentation tonight, as you can see, is on rainwater and how we can use it in the landscape. Before we get involved with that, though, I would like to ask all of the Washington County Master Gardener members who are on to please attend next month's meeting, the November meeting, after the presentation, because we will be voting on the new members for the board and the budget. So we need to have a quorum so that we can vote on both of those things. And now I would like to introduce Ann Geyer, who a past president of the Lincoln County Master Gardeners, and she has a very interesting background. Her grandfather was a landscaper at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And she went to the University of California and worked in the botanical garden there with local natives, and then has been a master gardener since 1981. So I think if there's anything to know, Anne probably knows it. So thank you very much for being with us this evening, Anne, and I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Hope. I'm very happy to be with you all this evening. Talking about rainwater harvesting is one of the topics that I do like to introduce people to. A lot of folks think that this is kind of a challenging topic, but I started doing rainwater collection in my garden when I moved to Oregon 10 years ago and didn't know much about it. And now I use only rainwater for all of my gardening in my 1-acre garden. And so I'm going to introduce you to the topic and really base a lot of remarks on my personal journey learning how to do all of this stuff. It's not that complicated. It's actually pretty straightforward. And of course, over time, the materials and the equipment that we use get simpler and easier and not so much cheaper, unfortunately, but certainly within the range of the average backyard gardener. So just want to start with what I'm going to be talking about, and more the things that I'm not going to cover. So first, rainwater harvesting or rainwater collection, some people call it. What is that? It's the ability to collect and store rain to use as a primary water supply. And it's actually one of the simplest and oldest methods of managing water supply. It's been used way back and almost since the time of gardening. We're going to also discuss some methods for distributing the water to the garden locations, because of course, as a gardener, that's really what we're trying to achieve, is how to get water to the locations in our garden that we want to use it. And I'm only going to speak about using rainwater collection for landscaping purposes, because that's where my experience is. It is possible to capture water and filter it and use it for potable purposes, maybe as a backup for your home, but that's not an area that I have any experience in. And as I understand it, the rules and requirements for that are quite a bit different than landscape purposes. So maybe it goes without saying to this group, but why are we interested in harvesting rainwater? And I always start because really having a good way of managing water and conserving water is one of the supports for sustainability, garden sustainability. When we collect rainwater, we're really conserving groundwater. I mean, at the end of the day, the water that we collect, for the most part, goes back into the soil, but it goes into the soil in a slower, deeper area or method. It provides an alternative to using city water sources, which in certain areas of our state can be quite expensive. It also protects well water. I'm on a well system, and one of the concerns I have is that I can still have a large, viable garden without negatively impacting the water that I need for my household. The other thing it does is it helps to recharge groundwater. Now, this might sound difficult, but what we really do when we're collecting the water is we're getting it back into the ground in a slower, more controlled fashion, and that is good for the ground. It's good for soil health, and has lots of other related benefits. Because we're reducing the amount of water that falls in a particular rainstorm on the ground, or not, then we're also impacting soil erosion. Again, what we're trying to do is capture the water, store it in a place that makes it useful, and return it to the landscape in a controlled fashion. Actually, rainwater is much better for plants, although, I don't have, I mean, for me, treated water that you get from your city, rainwater, it's really hard to tell the difference unless you've got water issues, which I've never had in my garden. But some people say that they have hard water. If you're getting water from the ground, you're going to have minerals and different components to it. If you live in an area where there might be a lot of air pollution or that gets into the water table, that could be a problem. But I think here in Oregon, unless I hear differently, I really find that one of the best reasons to collect the water is just to have more water available during the time that we need it. So I used three main sources for the content of what I'm talking about this evening. They're very accessible. I think that Tara put the links in the chat so that you can click on them. But if you read these, they're very short reads. They're very accessible. There's not a lot of technical material in here. And this will be a great, these three documents are a great guide to get you started with rainwater collecting. So the first one is from OSU Extension, and it's an overview of what do we mean when we talk about rainwater harvesting. And they give a run through of the components, things you need to know about it, and different things that we'll all be covering this evening. So this will be a sort of a take home for you. The second one is a checklist approach. So step 1 through step, I don't remember how many, but probably step 10, how to create your own rain barrel. And the city of Portland put this out. And this is actually fairly old. It's been around for a long time, but it's still available. And again, this is something you could just have on your workbench as you want to create your rainwater barrel. And then the last one is about the rules for rainwater collection in Oregon. And this is a pamphlet that's put out by the state. It's the Department of Consumer Business and Services. And generally, Oregon laws are pretty friendly towards collecting and using rainwater for both potable and non-potable uses. But in many areas, there's also going to be additional county or city requirements that you need to be aware of. And so since I'm not an expert in all of these rules, I do want to send you to this document and you can do a lookup on that. Generally, across the state, collecting water from a roof is the preferred method and does not require any kind of permits. Actually, there are some issues about collecting water once it's hit the ground. It still can be done, but that's a different set of requirements. So I'm taking the position that it's fairly easy to collect rainwater with a roof, and so that's the position that we're going to talk about today. So how do we get started? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We need a roof. We need a gutter that collects the water from the roof. We need a downspout that's going to deliver the water to where we want it, and we need some kind of water distribution. And generally, if you haven't put a storage system, what you've got here, sure, point's gonna work, but there's usually there's some kind of spigot or faucet that's inserted in there. And this would be a rainwater collection system. It's just you're not storing anything. So to store water, we add some kind of of storage, usually a rain barrel or a tank. This is just one picture I found on internet. It's a very simple starter system. Again, you're going to collect, you can use exactly what you've got on your house, assuming you've got gutters. Now, not all houses or buildings have gutters, so that would be something that you would definitely need. And the purpose of the gutter, again, is to collect the water and send it down the spout so it can be intercepted and put into the storage tank. So let's talk a bit about tanks. Here's a picture of what I call the classic rain barrel from city water departments. They're also called blue barrels because a number of them are blue, which we'll see in a minute. They're typically 50 to 55 gallon. These ones I'm showing here in this picture are designed for water collection, although there are other barrels that have been used for other purposes. You can find used barrels on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, or in my area, the ice cream stores will have these, and sometimes you can get them for free. Some cities actually make these available through the water department, part of their water conservation plan. So it's a good idea to do a little research to find out what's available in your area for a starter system. So here's a picture of, again, it's a blue barrel. This is there, for some reason they're blue. I'm not really sure I know why, but this is a typical installation. What we're not showing, again, is the roof, the gutter, and the downspout, but you can see here in the white, there's been a diverter that's been installed into the downspout, and that just diverts the water into the tank. And tanks need three components. You need a overflow, an outflow, and an inflow, and I'll talk about that in more detail. But those are the essential elements of a rainwater collection system. And typically, they tend to get elevated a bit to help with getting the water out of the barrel. So if one barrel is good, you can use more than one barrel, and it's not atypical to find that barrels are piggybacked together. Again, each of these is 50 gallons, and depending on the size of your garden or what kind of watering you want to do, you may need a lot more water than 50 gallons, although I think that that's a good starting place. And here you can see again that there's been, the downspout has a diverter on it that is that angled piece of guttering, and the water flows into the barrel. And then at the bottom, the barrels have been piggybacked together so that they all fill up and get used sort of in parallel with each other. Now, if you go horizontal like this, you can also have installations that go vertical. And this, it's personal preference, although I personally find that this one is more challenging because you can imagine the weight of a barrel that's filled with water. You need to make sure that you've got a support structure here that's strong enough to deal with that weight. And also, they tend to get taller, as you see in this picture. And so that makes maintaining them and installing them a bit more challenging, I think. But again, it's personal preference. They all work generally the same. Now, some cities, in fact, the city of Portland used to give away these blue barrels, and then they would have actually had workshops where you could decorate your barrel and beautify it and put it in your garden, kind of like this. I like these ideas. And then I actually found a picture of one that I would call a culturally appropriate rain barrel. And this is a Master Gardener program in Arizona that I was visiting. And it was on one of the, not quite the reservations, but it was a government building close to a reservation. And they had done their drum decor here. And I like this a lot. Just goes to show that you don't have to live with a utilitarian barrel. You can make it yours. Now, barrels come in all kinds of sizes, although they're always round. Mostly they're round, and there's a strong reason for them to be round, and that's that they're stronger. If you put a corner in this kind of plastic that's used for a barrel, it tends to be a weak spot, and water sloshes around, or it just weighs into it. So for the most part, you'll find the barrels that you're going to want to use are round like this. And these are the typical colors, although they're very easy to paint, so you can paint them any color you want if you wish to go that way. The one thing you do want to make sure you have is you want your barrel to be opaque, otherwise the sun tends to create algae inside the barrel, and I actually had to learn that the hard way. I had some barrels that weren't quite that the sun could get into, and I had quite an algae problem that I was able to get over. And now these are, I call these the utilitarian barrels, but there's also a strong interest in more modern barrels, or barrels that are designed to fit into kind of a city landscape. And a lot of these, I think, are the result of the pressure of homeowner associations that want to put in some kind of additional regulations on what kind of barrel, where can you put it, what size can it be, does it need to be behind a fence, can you mask it with plantings and different things like that. So if you happen to live in an area where you've got homeowner associations, I strongly advise that you read through those, or you contact someone and make sure what you're doing is going to fall within those guidelines, because you don't want to have to take it out or redo it after the fact. And these are just sampling. Every year there seems to be more and more options. And some of these I think are quite attractive. Okay, so let's talk a bit about what makes for a good rain barrel. So first and foremost, we want to make sure that the barrel is made out of food grade plastic. And I can't overemphasize that, because we're storing water. What does food grade plastic mean? It means that the plastic itself is not going to leach into the water. And also it's not going to be encumbered by noxious chemicals or different things like that that can be harmful. If you're using a used barrel, then you want to make sure that it's only ever been used for liquid food. So that's usually these barrels that you see here are filled with syrups or sugar solutions, although they can be used for a lot of other different things. So that's definitely something to make sure that the contents, and if you don't know what the contents were, then I strongly recommend that you don't get that barrel. They're not that expensive if bought new, but they're readily available used. So that's, again, a choice you can make. So never use things that had cooking oils or petroleum products, insecticides or pesticides. I think it's obvious why we're saying that. Maybe not so obvious about the cooking oils, but again, these oils can interact with the plastic and leach into the water. And since we don't know what that effect might be, it's just wise to stay away from it. Make sure you clean it thoroughly. And that's, I just put a garden, a hand controller so that I get some high water pressure. It's not like you need a lot of water pressure, but just something that does a good job. You can put some soap in it, and if it's particularly dirty, but again, you're putting water in this that's going to go on your landscaping, and you just want to make sure that you're doing that good clean job first. It's important that the barrel have a flat bottom, and this is for proper installation. So if it's not flat, if say it goes up, it's going to go like this. That may have a tendency to have the barrel tip, but also it's going to create a wear pattern. So you definitely want to make sure that the barrel that you're getting, even if it's new, because not all barrels are going to be flat, and that's what you want. I always put this in larger rather than smaller, because I think this is one of the areas where when you get used to collecting rainwater, you find that you never have enough. And so now what size you use is going to depend on what your how much water you want, what space you have, what you're comfortable, and as I've sort of showed in the beginning, you can always add the number of barrels later on. You can find, so the choice you get to make is whether you do it yourself, which is what I did. I started with all the basic pieces and put it together myself, and I'm going to talk about that. Or now it's easy to find some kits, and they're usually designed for either the blue barrels that you see here, so the 50-gallon barrels. There's quite a few kits, nice kits, easy to use, and they even send you the tools that you need with the exception of a drill. So it's kind of one-stop shopping. Or these, I think these white barrels in the cages are called ICBs, and they're 300 gallons. These things, again, they're fairly easy to find, particularly if you live in a rural area, because farmers use them a lot for different purposes. They're very lightweight, but because of the size, it generally takes two people to move them and handle them. And of course, you're not going to want to do that once you put the water in. In both cases, they're going to be heavy. So you want to do all of your sighting and your manipulation before you fill them up. You also want to make sure that you've got some kind of a top. So if you look at the picture of the blue barrels here, you can see those two openings. And unfortunately, a lot of the used blue barrels come and they're missing the caps that go into those openings. Now, there's ways you can address that, but if you can, if you have a choice and they come with caps, definitely get those caps. And the reason why we want to have them closed is for particularly mosquitoes, and keep mosquitoes from breeding in the water. And of course, the bigger the opening, the more likely you're going to get other kinds of debris or small animals, which to me is a little bit more troublesome than mosquitoes. But of course, we want to keep both of those out of our water environment. And then you'll need an overflow fitting of some sort, which if some barrels, if they're designed for rainwater collecting, they may come with the overflow fitting in it. But sometimes they're not. It's not that difficult to install them. And then you want something to get the water out of it. And generally, we're using some kind of garden hose or some kind of piping, like PVC piping, if you want to go into an irrigation system or a larger distribution system. So again, just to recap here, you can buy new barrels. Oh, I didn't mention that. A new blue barrel is usually somewhere between $50 and $100. I think these, I don't know what the cost of a new ICB is. These prices that I've listed on this sheet are for used ones, and you can find these pictures both come from Facebook Marketplace. Okay, so let's talk about creating our rain barrel. Now this picture comes out of the second pamphlet that I mentioned in the beginning, how to create your rain barrel. And it's got a lot of information in here, and I'm just going to walk us through it so that you see it's really not that complicated. So again, you need the barrel. Now the barrel can be long and thin, or it could be shorter and squatter. What you don't want to have, because we want to have a cover for it, is that we don't recommend that you store water in open containers like half oak barrels, or sometimes you see people using garbage cans. So there's all kinds of ways you can do that. I'm not recommending that because of the issues that you have with insects, pests, and debris, which can interfere with your system. And again, it's very simple. Well, simple. It's pretty straightforward to get an appropriate kind of barrel. So, so starting from the top there, we're assuming that, or I'm assuming that you're going to install your barrel as part of your downspout. So you need to have a downspout interrupter. And you buy these and they're designed to, you cut a section out of your downspout wherever it's convenient, at a height that's convenient to you. I try to do mine where it's shoulder height or lower, so it's easier for me to maintain. And you take the bottom part of your downspout away and you put in this diverter. And you may have an issue where if your barrel only has a round hole, usually gutters and downspouts are square or rectangular, so you may need a adapter, and that's what you see is that little darker picture. It's really to go from a square component into a round component so that you can put it into the hole. Now, if your hole isn't big enough, one of the very things you do is you can get a tool that actually cuts around holes. And a lot of you may already have that, but again, if you buy a kit, that's one of the things that the kit now provides. I think it's because the manufacturers recognize that not everybody's got this kind of hole making thing, and it does make life easier. I do recommend using the cutting tool rather than try and use a knife or scissors or something like that. It's much safer. You get a much nicer hole, and you get something that's easier to work with. Okay, then the next thing you do is you look and see whether you need to put in fittings. So we need, again, we need an overflow. See if I can find my, yeah, here's my pointer too. You need an overflow, which means when the barrel fills up, you want to make sure that the extra water has some place to go. And so you just really, in essence, put a hole in your barrel, put the right kind of fitting on it, attach a hose, and off it goes. Or in some cases, people will put diverters on their downspout so that when you're collecting water, it goes into the diverter, and when you don't want to collect water, you close off that diverter and it just continues down like it normally would as if you weren't collecting water. So there are kind of two ways to do that. I like to use the overflow on the barrel because that means water is refreshing in my barrel. I won't say all the time, but it just helps to keep that water going. Now you're collecting water, so you have to make sure you know where that extra water is going to go. It could go exactly where it goes today through your downspout, or this is an opportunity if you want to make a rain ditch or a rain garden, something associated with this, then that's an opportunity you have to redirect the overflow or the extra water into that part of your garden. And then you need something that's going to allow you to get water out of the barrel, and that's normally done at the bottom. So what happened to my pointer? Down here. And mostly what people put in here are just your standard garden outlet or, faucet kind of thing. You can have a twisty thing or one that goes like this or whatever your favorite device is. Okay, so that's the essence of a barrel. And again, it's just not complicated. The challenge is to have all the pieces at the time you create your barrel, which I have to say sometimes I miss a piece. I get irritated because I have to stop and go to the store. And then the techniques are very straightforward. The only tool that I've used in doing this is a drill, and a drill with the things that make the holes of the right size. Okay, so now let's talk about roofs. So roofs come in, out of lots of different materials, and most roofs are going to be okay to be used for collecting water. So anything that's got a standing seam metal roof or corrugated metal like this. This picture doesn't show a gutter, so you do need sometimes corrugated roofs, which are on sheds or barns or things like that, are not built with a gutter. So that would be something you'd need to be aware of, and you can add a gutter to this sort of thing. Those are fine. As you can see, the water falls on the roof and slides down. So those are the preferred ones, but many of us don't have those kinds of roofs. So other things are workable. It's just they're less efficient, which means less water gets funneled down into the gutter. So asphalt or composition shingles work just fine. Concrete tile or clay tile is also going to work just fine. And even if you have solar panels on your roof, that's not going to be a problem. Those panels are going to get wet when it rains, and so we're not changing any dynamic about what's happening to your roof. We're just collecting the water as it runs down the roof into the gutter. So the bottom line is most materials will work fine, but there are things you need to avoid, and that's this list here. So generally, it's not recommended to use wood shingles because they're typically treated with a fire retardant, and that fire retardant can leach out into the water, and we just don't want that into our water system. In the same way, copper roofs, I mean, I don't know how many people have copper roofs, but if you do, or I guess it's a decorative element, you don't want to expose your water collection to a copper roof. Same reason, it leaches into the rainwater. If you've got any kind of lead flashing, you want to be very careful about that. And then some roofs, especially here in Oregon, they get treated. They get treated with a biocide, which can be zinc or copper, maybe even other things. And I mean, they're treated in order to prevent mold or moss or algae growth. And that is also not recommended to collect water for storage systems. So the bottom line is if you have these kinds of roofs, the first thing is to get a water test, is to collect the water, get it tested, see what kind of issues you're dealing with, and get some assistance in determining whether that's viable. If you have any of the other kinds of roofs, then um, I personally don't feel you need a water test. Of course, you're always welcome to get one. But they're just fine. They don't interfere with the water itself. Okay, now what's a roof? So when I first started, I thought, oh, a roof is my house. I have to collect water from my house. And that was, I had problems with that because a lot of my garden is pretty far away from my house. But let's just take a minute and realize that we can build a roof in a way or in a place that's convenient to where we want to collect and use the water. So I just found some of these examples of ways in which people have created a roof in order to get water into their water barrel. And I have to say, I use the bottom too. I have a lot of sheds on my property that are in areas where I garden. And so I've used those shed roofs rather than my house roof to collect water. And particularly this one on the, oops, I keep losing my pointer. This one here, oops, sorry. This one here, I find really helpful, which it's just very simple. It's really like two fence post and a big vertical that I had some extra corrugated aluminum that I was using for other purposes. And it just runs water right into the barrel. So no downspout, no, nothing. It's not the most efficient because a lot of water misses the barrel, but at least if you need to collect water in an area that's not really conveniently located next to your house or your garage or a shed, this is a simple way to do it. Okay, so that's roofs. Now let's talk about keeping debris out of your barrel, and that starts with taking a look at the gutters. So I always clean my roof before the rainy season, so just about now. I mean, I live 20 miles outside of Newport, so, you know, kind of quasi country. I have a lot of trees. I get a lot of stuff on my roof. And if I don't clean my roof, then all of that stuff is going to clog up my downspouts. So generally, I'm doing that for household purposes, even if I didn't have rainwater collection. But it's really important if you're collecting water because it will interfere with the ability to actually get the water. So clean the roof. And gutter guards are useful. I find they don't work so well for me because I have all these very small pine needles that just, no matter what gutter guard I've tried, they still get through the gutter guard. But if you live in an area where maybe it's maple leaf or larger leaves, less conifer needles, maybe the gutter guard will work better for you or work well for you. You can use some basket strainers, and there are lots of types on the marketplace. And these go into right here. They go into where your your downspout attaches to the gutter. And again, they're designed to keep things out of the gutter. Again, I find them to be somewhat useful, but they're a maintenance issue. You got to get up there and clean them out all the time. And depending on where your gutters are, that may mean getting a ladder out, or if you're collecting it from a two-story house, that could be an issue. So these work, but they've got some negatives attached to them. The one I prefer is this thing, which is called a leaf collector or a debris collector. And what this does is it sits on top. So normally the gutter would be right here. And again, you're going to cut the gutter and install this to the top of the second piece. And the water stuff comes down here. This has got a very, very, very fine mesh on it. So it's going to collect the debris and stuff that actually gets through your gutter. So even if you're using gutter screens or these basket strainers or whatever technique you're using, it's really nice to have one of these leaf collectors. Now, this picture shows it like it's right up at the top of your roof, but I tend to, again, install it at shoulder height so I can see what's happening, and it's easy for me to reach in and clean it out. And that does its job. And these are not inexpensive. They're about $50, but I started out not using something like this, and I found over time I was spending so much time cleaning out my gutters and getting my downspout to actually collect the water that the investment was worth it. And then the one I installed is now 6 years old, and I haven't had any issues with it, so it pays back in the long run. Okay, now the next thing is to help keep debris out. There's a feature called a first flush. And what this does is when you first start to collect the water, so assuming it's in the rainy season, you're going to have just a lot of debris. It's going to be in your roof. Maybe your downspout isn't that clean. I don't know anyone who actually gets in and cleans their downspout out. And so these first flush systems are designed to divert the water into a separate tank, a separate pipe that does not go into your water collection system. Its main purpose is to collect that first flush of water and then let it drain out. And the way they work is you're diverting the water here. It's got a little tiny ball in, which starts out way down here. And as the water fills up in this thing, the ball reaches right here. Oops, here's my picture. And when it gets to this point, then the water's not going to not go down this pipe, and it's going to go off into your tank. And so, and these things, I realize I don't have the bottom here, but these things have a component down here where the water will actually drip out. And so you do have to clean these out. But again, you're really only going to need to use this for the first 1 or 2 times you're collecting water during the rainy season. And you can buy these, and they usually come with that leaf collector that I mentioned, or you can make these yourself using PVC if you're so inclined to do that. forgot I had this one. Okay, I think I said all of that. Oh, yeah, so the other thing I just want to mention is that when I was doing my research, there was some controversy about whether or not they were really needed. And I think that the issue is how much debris you have in your environment and the cost of putting this in, and the fact that you still, this is a maintenance point. You got to maintain this and clean it out all the time. So I will admit that I didn't know about these when I started my system, and I don't have them on my tanks, although I am, for one of my tanks where I have a lot of debris issues, I am going to install it this year. In fact, I started working on it this week. So rains are coming. So that's something I leave you. You could read about these. Again, they're very easy to install. You can buy kits to make it easy for yourself. You could try it without doing this and then add it later if you feel that it's going to help your water quality. All right, so now let's talk about distributing the water. And there are really two methods that we rely on, either gravity or a pump. So it's all about water. When you're storing water in the tank, it's going to come out slowly, let's put it that way. So the way gravity works is that that's just it. The water is going to fall down, and the more distance it falls, the more water pressure you're going to have. So you can use gravity as long as where you're watering is at a lower elevation than your tank. And so the slope and the distance matter. And here's some guidelines for you to consider. So if you're used to doing drip systems, and that's the language I'm using here. So a 1/2 inch main line is best because it won't restrict the flow. You don't want to have small hoses or small pipes, things, and rely on those for distributing your water. You just won't be happy. Now it turns out that soaker hoses have the least pressure requirements. So you could run a hose from your tank, say down to your garden, if your garden is at a lower elevation, and then into a soaker hose. And that works reasonably well. And I have some installations that do that. Most irrigation systems work on 12 to 20 PSI. Gravity is about 0 to 2 PSI for flat terrain. So you can see what the issue is right there, is somehow or other you've got to elevate the pressure that's coming out of a gravity-fed system. And one way to do that is to elevate the barrel. And the second way to do that is to have the water flow downhill over a longer distance. So I have some examples of what that might look like. So I just call this the gravity assists. So I'm sure you've seen these. It's one place is, well, where are you going to put your barrel? And you could put it anywhere that's elevated. If you've got a garden wall like the picture on the left shows, it doesn't actually show how the water got into that barrel, but that's a different point. Or it's not uncommon for people who are doing rainwater collection for their raised beds to have these little stools, and they put the barrel up there, and you can see that's not a lot of distance, but that's enough distance to operate a soaker hose that's in this raised bed. It might not be quite enough distance for an irrigation that has the emitters on it. And then it's very common that you see this kind of arrangement here where the ICB tank is elevated on a platform. And again, the higher the distance and the further the distance is from your garden, the more pressure you're going to get. And so I couldn't find any good guidelines for, if you needed, so how high and how far. So this is a bit of a trial and error at the moment. Maybe the professionals have some better guidelines, but I went searching for guidelines and couldn't find anything that I thought was useful for us as backyard gardeners. Now, the other way to get pressure is to use a tank. And it's not unusual for people to install what's called an on-demand tank. This is the kind of tank that you would find in a camper RV. They're pretty small. They're not very expensive. They're designed to be plumbed up using PVC. Uh, so that makes it pretty easy to work with. And I find it's better to install them close to your tank, although in my situation, I didn't do that because it just didn't work very well. So these are guidelines as opposed to hard and fast rules. An on-demand pipe is exactly that. When you turn the water on, it causes water to flow through the pump, which turns the pump on and creates the pressure. And when you turn the water off, it closes the pump down. So nothing too complicated. It's a pump though, so you do need some kind of a power. And if you're installing this close to your house, then you probably you may have an outdoor outlet, or you could have an outdoor outlet installed in a convenient location. But we found in my Master Gardener program that we turned to solar because we had two of our gardens had no electricity and we wanted to do rainwater collection. And we found that it was fairly straightforward to to install solar panels and a battery to run the pump. So these are the components that you need that I'm showing here. These are actually what we use in two of our demo gardens. This is an RV 12-volt pump. This is a solar panel front and back. It looks a little awkward, but it's just to show you what the two pieces look like. You do need this controller, which is what connects the solar up to the battery and the pump. And again, it's fairly easy to install. It's just push the wires in and turn the screw, and it all works fairly well. This whole system cost us about $200. And we've been using it, and we have one garden that's about an acre, and it runs, well, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how big your water storage is. It really just matters how much pressure this thing is going to work. And this simple RV pump puts out more pressure than we need for our purposes. So again, very straightforward to do. Okay, so now I want to turn to, well, water. So, I mean, how much water could we conceivably get? Could we get enough water to operate a garden? And here's the only math here, and you don't really need to remember this, but the basic formula is you take the size of your roof in square feet, and you multiply that by your estimated annual rainfall. And then you multiply that by what's called an efficiency component. And remember when I talked about the kind of roof you had, some roofs provide more water. Some roofs are more efficient than others. So you don't get 100% of the water, you might get less than that. And so in where I live in Lincoln County, these are the equations that I use. So I've several tanks, but for this exercise, I have one tank that's 500, that could store 2,500 gallons. Can I create enough water for that tank? That was my question. So I'm using one side of my bedroom, which turns out to be 500 square feet, times 80 inches, which is the average rainfall in Lincoln County, times this just call it a factor that makes the equation work. And then here's the efficiency, could be between 3/4 and 90%. So I just picked 80 for the sake of argument. So off my roof in 1 inch of rain, I could conceivably capture 20,000 gallons. Well, I only have a 2,500 gallon tank, so this just persuades me that I can capture more water than I'm ever going to be able to. I mean, there's more rain in the rainy season than I am ever going to be able to capture. And so you can see In my case, I just keep adding tanks so I can have more water. So is it important to know this? Not really. Basically, what happens is here in Oregon, if you live west of I-5, which I think that captures most of Washington County, there's going to be more water for you to collect than you need to worry about. And so I just looked up this chart, and here is the average monthly rainfall for Washington County. So the average total rainfall is 40 inches, and it gets divided by month. And so you can see that why are we collecting water? Because when we have lots of water, it's not really during our growing season. And where we don't have very much water, like this is less than 1 inch of water. This is looks like 1.5. So kind of a dry zone. This is the period where we want to collect water in the rainy season, store it, and use it in the dry season. And I hope I persuaded you that the only limiting factor is how much water you can store, not how much water you can capture. Okay, so how much water do you conceivably need? And that depends on what your gardening needs are. So this is an example. So in general, in the summer, which say is 3 to 5 months, so the dry season, and generally the OSU recommends that we consider 1 inch of water per week over the entire growing surface. And so I think that's hard to conceptualize. So I broke that down into raised beds. So if you have a typical 4 foot by 8 foot raised bed, that's going to require 20 gallons per week times the 16 weeks of the dry season, or 320 gallons. And if you have 5 beds, which I think is probably in the ballpark, that's going to be 1,600 gallons, or 32 blue barrels. And that becomes one of the issues, which is how many blue barrels, which are, remember, are 50-gallon barrels, can you site on your property, or do you want to deal with? And as you collect more water, you're highly motivated to get larger storage tanks, just to make it easier on you. So here's an example. Here's the kind of a schematic of my personal setup here. Now I didn't do this all at once. I started out with one rain barrel. So I have a garden that's pretty much on a slope, and it's more or less a 1 acre garden that kind of looks like this. I have a house. I have a well, which I do not now use. I use no well water, or if it were city water, I don't use any city water for my gardening, my 1 acre gardening. It's all rainwater. I have lots of little outbuildings that I could collect water from, but at the moment, I'm collecting it from my house, as I said, my bedroom, from my workshop in this tank number 2. So this tank feeds this part, with the exception of here at my orchard. I have a separate tank just for the orchard. I have lots of, this tank actually is gravity fed and runs downhill and tops off a separate storage tank I have in my greenhouse. And I run a small nursery for my Master Gardener native plant sale. And so I have lots of containers where these plants live on a year-round basis. And so this tank is collecting water here because it was convenient, and then it is used for this area. And then I have a tank which is up the hill, and this feeds sort of this area here, including keeping my pond topped off in the summertime. And so these are just the statistics for my personal setup. So I have this tank here is 2,500 gallons, and I'll show you a picture in a minute so you have a sense about what size is that. This tank has a pump. It also has a pressure tank. Again, mainly because what I didn't know much about these pumps when I did this, and I just duplicated what I had from my well system. And what I find is that it's overkill to do that. An on-demand pump is perfectly acceptable for the kind of gardening that most of us do. This is my second pump, which is slightly bigger. I didn't mention that the pressure, the sweet spot for pumps and price is 2,500 gallons. And the reason for that is that that's the largest size that can fit comfortably in the back of a pickup truck and be conveniently shipped. And so if you get something smaller, like if you were to get a 1,000 gallon pump, that might be just as expensive as the 2,500. Now, again, sometimes bigger is not better. It depends on what your size and capabilities are and where you can put it, which are the more important factors than getting something because it's convenient for the manufacturers or the shippers. So this pump is, again, almost equivalent to that. It is gravity fed, and I have piped it down here, and this is about, I don't know, it's maybe 500 yards. So it sits on the ground, but this is an example of how the distance is what's creating the pressure. And it worked okay. It works okay to fill this secondary pump. What it doesn't do is give me enough pressure for my garden hose. So I did put an on-demand pump right here next to this, and that works really well. And then this thing also is just pressure because this is way up on top of the hill, my hill. This is completely gravity fed, and it creates enough pressure that it services this area with no requirement for a pump. So some different configurations and reasons for going in different directions. So here's what my setup looks like. So this is pump number 1. This is my bedroom roof. It looks a little better now, but I should update this picture. But this is it's about this size. I'm gonna say I should have checked these out. I keep this ladder here because so I always I always want to I really need to install you can get just a little device that tells you how much water's in your tank, but I haven't done it yet. So I use this ladder just to climb up, and my input is right there. Mine goes off a gutter. Here's my gutter. You can't see it in this picture, but I just have you don't even need a downspout diverter. I just use a small piece of black piping, and it goes right into the opening here. And then it's underground piped to a shed, which is where my pump is. This is my pump, and here's my pressure tank. And again, this is the part that I say is overkill. It's nice to have it, but it's not inexpensive, and it's something you have to figure out how it works. And when the power goes out, I have to go and manually reset this. So I just as soon not have this and just have something that's a simpler on-demand pump. This is pump number 2 that was over there next to the workshop, and you can see it's just sitting on the ground. And these are the storage containers in my greenhouse. And this is the example of where I didn't cover these and I got algae. So now I have this black plastic that I put on in the summertime, and it does a great job of keeping algae out of these tanks. And I keep these 3 is kind of overkill, but I had this idea that I could use them as a heat sink for the winter time, and that works decently. I mean, you're not going to be growing summer vegetables, but it does keep the greenhouse a bit warmer than otherwise. And this is the tank. It's a concrete tank. It's actually a cistern, so it sits in the ground. And this is the one that's at the top of the hill. And the important thing is here I can actually get down into it. It's big enough that I don't feel claustrophobic. And this is probably not something you're going to do if you live in a city or in your backyard. It was there when I bought my property, and it wasn't used. And it took me a little bit of elbow grease to get this cleaned out, but now that it was cleaned out once, I don't really have to do it. I let the water flow in the winter time, and I keep this empty until the spring rains come, and that's when I fill it back up. And then this is the tank that feeds my orchard, and it's quite a bit smaller because it's only got a single purpose, and that's to provide summer irrigation for my orchard area. Okay, so now I just want to close with just a few words about maintenance. So these systems do require some maintenance. You'll be much happier if you get into the habit of doing routine maintenance. So on a monthly basis, I'm checking any exposed screening on my tanks, which is why I like to have things installed at kind of shoulder height, so it makes it easy. I do clean my roofs and gutters from debris during the rainy season. I don't bother to do that during the dry season because I'm not collecting water during the dry season. I'm always checking for algae and insects if that's an issue. And if you're using a first flush or leaf collectors, generally you want to stay on top of that. This is probably more weekly than monthly. And again, if you install them where you can see them, you can be walking around in your garden anyway. It's fairly easy just to reach in and clean those out with your hand. You don't need to disconnect it from the gutter. Then at the beginning of winter, this is where you do your more detailed maintenance. So you do want to check for leaks and repairs. Gaskets where you put the holes in for your intake and outflow, those over time can get degraded by the sun and the water. Well, I've had mine in place between I guess 8 years on the long side and 5 years on the short side, and I haven't had any issues with them. But I do check them, and I do put some sealer, some silicone, or Vaseline is another thing you can use, just to keep those in good shape. Always looking for groundwater. These tanks have a lot of, or they could possibly have a lot of water in them, but even if you've got a 50-gallon tank, if that gets a leak, I think you want to know that and make sure that that water is not hitting the foundation of your house or putting so much water that you're going to have erosion or soil slippage or something like that. So it's always good just to routinely get your mind around looking for water around your tanks. Always check if your pumps are working properly. You can burn these little on-demand pumps out if something happens and they don't shut off. And that's happened to me once. I did have to change one of my pumps out because I went on vacation and I don't know why, but for some reason it turned itself on, little gremlins, I guess, and didn't turn itself off, and it got burned out. And then finally, if you've got exposed plumbing, you either have to drain these pipes during the winter time or protect them from freezing. And I'm using PVC in my environment for the most part, and every year I have some part of my plumbing system that does get a crack in it. It's one of the reasons I like PVC because it's pretty easy to fix, but over time now I'm upgrading my PVC to PEX, which is just a different type of piping material that is more resistant to cracking when the water freezes. The other thing you can do, and I've started to do it, is to drain the water out of the pipes, the output pipes during the winter season. You can still collect the water, which I do, but I just don't let it flow into the pipes, and that means there's no water that to freeze. And mainly I try to do most of my water collection in the spring rains rather than the winter rains, just because it's closer to the period when I'm going to use the water in the first place. Okay, so that's what I wanted to communicate with you. I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about rainwater collection. Hopefully give you some guidelines on how you can get started. This is my contact information. I'm always happy to talk, answer questions individually. You can email me, or the other information is our Lincoln County Master Gardener Program.
Well,
So Hope,
Anne,
over
thank
to
you
you.
so much. This has been very helpful. I feel like I could now, on the helpline, direct a person who wanted to get started on rainwater harvesting. I think I could give them some ideas and get them started on it. So
Good.
we do have some questions, so let me pull those up. for you. Um, so Michael said, and you may have actually answered this, is your calculation for how much water you collect for a year of collection? And how long can you store water before it needs to be refreshed? And I think you
Let
addressed
me
that.
answer, sorry, let me answer the second question first.
Okay.
How long can you store water before it needs to be refreshed? And I don't actually know the answer to that question. I know that when you buy water in a plastic bottle, it's got a use by date, and it's usually about 2 years. But that's a different kind of plastic than we're using for um, these water tanks that I've shown you pictures of. Um, I have to say that I generally use most of my water in a growing season. Uh, and so probably, so what am I trying to say? So I guess I just don't know the answer to that. Maybe again, but remember I said what I try and do is when my tank is full, I'm I'm using the outflow so that the water is sort of turning over. It's not
Mm,
really
right.
recycling. It's not circulating. It's just the tank fills up and then the water goes out of the tank. But that has the effect of water comes in, it makes a little bit of turbulence and it goes
Yeah.
out. So you could sort of think of that as refreshing the water, but I don't think that's what Michael was trying to ask. So sorry, Michael, I've never been asked that question before, and I'll have to look up an answer for that one
Um, and how often do you clean the gutter screen during the rainy season?
whenever it needs it.
So, I mean, is that like monthly or weekly or?
Well, I think that depends on what I'm in the middle of a forest, really. I've got lots of different
Yeah,
kinds of trees that
sure.
drop leaves and nuts and seeds and things like that. So, but even so, with all of that, I probably I do a thorough clean, so I get everything off at like right now in October, the beginning
Okay.
of the rainy season, and then for those gutters that I can reach on a reasonably sized ladder, I'll go up when it looks like the debris is mounting up and just scrape it off or use the hose. Um, and that could be maybe one more time during the winter season. And then I'll do another clean. Since I like to collect most of my water in the spring, I'll do another clean um, in the spring. Now I'm doing more cleaning than other people will do because I'm not using the first flush system. So
Okay.
if you
Right.
had a first flush system, you may find that you don't have to do quite as much cleaning because rather than clean your roof, you're allowing that stuff to come down through your gutter and you're pulling it out,
Yeah.
right? So there, like all of this stuff, it's not science. It's kind of um, it's important to be an observer of what your water system is doing and stay on top of it and react to when you're seeing things pile up.
Right. And it's going to be different for every situation, every
Yeah,
location. Okay.
exactly.
Next question is, and I think you may have addressed this, do you use drip emitters? And if so, do you have any problems with them clogging up from particles in the collected water?
I do use drip emitters. I use them on my tank one, which is the one that's got the most sophisticated pressure system. But also, when you're using that kind of drip system, you put a filter and a backflow on it. And so I don't have any problems. I have to clean that filter out a lot, but I don't have any problems with it getting down into. Although I have to say, 2 years ago, I completely upgraded the materials that I'm using to what I call more modern, and they work so much better than the stuff I was using, even 5 years ago. So if you've got the newer type of piping
Okay.
with the emitters built in, I would say chances are, provided you put your regulator and your backflow on, you're not going to have that many problems.
Okay. And here's somebody who has a rainwater collection system already, and it says it has a sulfur smell. Do you have any idea what could be causing that?
A sulfur smell. Um, okay, so my first thing would be, is the water actually coming from the roof? It's not coming from the ground, would be one thing. Um, sulfur just, it just, something's contaminating the water. I would do a water test to make sure you know what the contaminants are. It could be bad piping. Um, it could mean, I think I would take one of my downspouts apart and take a look and see what that inside of that. I mean, downspout material is cheap. And so even if you got to the point where you felt you needed to replace those downspouts, that would be a reasonable thing to do. Now, I do want to make it clear, I'm just speculating.
Yeah,
So it'd be kind of the troubleshooting things that go through my mind.
okay.
But um, some people's water is just, but it's mostly groundwater as opposed to rainwater. So, I mean, my first thought is that somehow or other, the water isn't just roof-based water. It's somehow you're collecting water that's going through some sulfur source.
Yeah,
And if it's not that, which would imply you're not following Oregon recommendations, and it probably is something with your piping, somewhere in your piping.
okay. And then how do you had several pictures where there were rain barrels up high. And how do they get up that high? I assume they're full of water when you put there, right?
Well, no. Well, let me come back to that. You got to
Okay,
install your tanks before you fill them up, because otherwise you're going to need a crane to move these things
yeah,
around. Um, they're very lightweight when they're empty. Even my big ones, two of them, I mean, I could probably lift it. If I could get my arms around it, I could probably lift it myself. It's just the bigger they get, the more bulky. They don't weigh much. So
yeah,
the most important thing is to do your installation before you put any water in it at all. Or empty the water out if you need to. In
okay.
my, for
So
example, they, if you don't install them on a perfectly flat area over time, they can start to, sorry, you can't see my hands. They can start to slope a little bit. And so, you can, but to fix that, you got to take the water out. And that's not so simple, because now you got a lot of water that you got to
yeah.
put somewhere. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's all we have time for because we have to go on to our chapter meeting. But thank you so much. And this was there was a lot of good information here, and I think we've all learned a great deal.
Okay. And I'll be happy to send the slides to you, Hope, if people are interested in those.
Okay, why don't you? That's a good idea. Then I would have them.
Okay, excellent. All right, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so now